The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, everyone. This is a special City Council study session of January the 28th. It's now 6:08 p.m. I have confirmed that all members of the council are present and available to hear both audio and video. And with that being said, I will now turn it over to the city manager to start us off. Mr. Tripp.
Thank you, Mayor Atchison, Mayor Pro Tem, members of City Council. First of all, I want to thank you for your attentiveness and your engagement throughout these workshops. Staff has worked diligently here to provide good background information for you that encompasses many years, actually, that brings us to this point. You have asked great questions. We've had good questions come in also from our community. We've shared, and these questions have all shared a number of very reasonable concerns about our rates and the future of our utility. First of all, we take extremely seriously, and it's really our job on your behalf and on behalf of our customers and residents and businesses to make certain that we all have access to safe and reliable water and sewer services. We take that job really seriously, but it's also our job to be responsive to you and our community. What we are presenting tonight is a series of policy recommendations, not specific rates, but policy recommendations for 2022 water and sewer rates that are the result of listening to you and to our community. These recommendations incorporate many of your questions and concerns and are what will provide the lowest sustainable rates that support a safe and reliable utility for our community. Tonight, we will want to get your feedback on these recommendations. And once we've got that feedback, we will then bring back to our community recommendations. We will use these to actually formulate specific rate recommendations, which should be available for your consideration in March or April. So tonight's work's important. Tonight's work is important to get final direction for you on these policies. Personally, I appreciate your attendance and continued participation. This certainly isn't the end, but it's a major step forward in our 2022 rate setting process. Christine Gray from our Public Works and Utilities Department will kick us off tonight, and you'll hear from a number of staff. Again, thank you so very much for your attentiveness and for your care and concern for this really important issue.
Thank you, Mr. Tripp. Good evening, everybody. And as Dawn mentioned, we will have a handful of presenters tonight. So there will be some of us clicking in and out of our cameras. There are 25 slides. We'll go through those and we will have a conversation at the end. So I want to move on to...
Hang on just a minute.
Yep.
Staff has asked that we hold our questions till the end, but we don't want to miss one. So as we're going through, if you have a question on a slide that's being presented, put it in the chat of the slide number you're referring to and the question so that we can make sure that staff is capturing all those and we don't miss them by having to wait too long. So again, if you have a question on the slide, put it in the chat, use the slide number and also the question that you have so they can start looking for answers. All right, Christine, now we're ready.
Thank you, Mayor. So this is a reminder, where have we been and where are we now? So we met with you first in early October and talked about our overall water and wastewater infrastructure. Julie Kaler, our engineering manager, presented to you about all of the things that go into our utility. And we continued that discussion with you all in middle of October. We also talked a bit about our meter replacement project, which is finishing up as we speak. And then we did speak with you over both of those meetings about some community participation interests that you had. In early November, we started talking with you about water costs and water rates. And because that's such a big topic, we continued that conversation into our December meeting. And then we finished up that December meeting with the wastewater discussion and some discussion about tonight's meeting. So here we are tonight. We're going to talk about this 2022 rate recommendation process. Our agenda for this evening will include a handful of things. One, we'll walk through some community questions and comments that were received since the December 15th workshop. Those were not included in your presentation because as of last week, we hadn't received very many. We now have a couple of slides that will walk through some questions with you. If you recall, back when we did all of our presentations, we had starred some items and called them levers.
Excuse me, Chris. Chris, this is Max. Can somebody advance the slide? It's still on the title slide.
It should be on tonight. Okay, so I'm advancing it to the workshop leading to tonight's discussion, and you are not seeing that. No, oh dear, okay. That is challenging. Better?
Nope.
No, okay. I'm
Seems
at a
like
loss.
it's not a good technical night for us. You and me, Christine.
I might ask for our IT guru, Matt Williams, to come on and perhaps walk me through this because it should be showing you the slide that talks about the workshops that we have been holding. Matt Williams, do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, I would check. I think it's probably paused. So if you have something that's over the screen, it'll pause it on the last, like the title screen. So make sure that it's not paused.
So it's advancing for me.
Right, but so open up that sharing tab and make sure that your screen share isn't on pause.
Okay. I see a thumbs up from Councilor Seymour. Okay,
Still,
so-
still on the same title slide. There you go.
Okay, so sorry. Oh goodness, okay. I'll back up a little bit. So let me start from this so we all are on the same page. Again, we've talked with you in October and November and December about a variety of things. We talked about infrastructure, we talked about costs, we talked about expenses. Tonight we're talking about the rate setting process for 2022. Okay. Can everybody see the agenda for tonight? Okay. I'm looking at Councilor Seymour because he's right there. We're going to talk about a handful of things. So we have some community comments and questions that were received since the December 15th workshop that was not in what was presented to you through Novus, through our online package. We hadn't received any questions, and in the last week we've gotten a few, so we'll walk through those. You recall that we put some stars next to the items where City Council has the opportunity to make some changes all throughout our presentations. And we've summarized those. We've also broken them out into which ones we believe are prudent and which ones we believe are not prudent. And by prudent, we're thinking about and talking about those items that we recommend, that we think are necessary to move forward or that are important to move forward. We'll also go through the 2022 rate setting timeline at the very end, and then obviously receive direction from you about what to move forward. So I have two slides that go through some community questions and comments since the last meeting. I'll read through them and then also read through the answers. There are about 8 total. So this one person says, I think providing homeowners and water users with improved water consumption data would be extremely useful and provide users the opportunity to reduce their water use or identify leaks. Absolutely agreed, and we are working right now on a customer portal project, and that should be coming out to our customers this summer. Is the city trying to stretch its existing water supplies over an expanding population driven by the increase in multifamily apartments? If so, shouldn't those projects bear a heavier development cost versus the existing population? And if the addition of single-family and multifamily dwellings in the city is stretching our water infrastructure capacity, also shouldn't those projects bear a heavier cost for infrastructure replacement through tap fees or rates? And yes, the city does charge tap fees. We talked about this at length in November and December, and then as part of the December presentation workshop. We charge tap fees for each new connection to our system to make sure that our current customers are not paying for system changes or for additional water supply necessary for a new development. If some project requires system changes above and beyond what we've already planned for, then the developer needs to pay for those changes in addition to their tap fee. Question number 3, shouldn't all water users be put on the same cost per 1,000 gallon or cost per gallon basis? Why should a residential homeowner's water rate be different than commercial, multifamily, irrigated, or HOA properties? And we talked about this in the last 2 workshops. Customer rates are based on the impact that they have on our utility system. This differs by each type of customer. Residential customers use water very differently from business customers, and so we want to make sure that the rate that we are charging each customer type is in line with their impact to the system. What portion and dollar amount of the water department budget or fund is being used to fully fund contributions to PARA? So the city does not contribute or participate in Colorado's Public Employees Retirement Association, PARA. We have our own retirement benefits through a defined contribution or 401A plan for all of our full-time benefited customers, employees, some of whom are customers, and our part-time benefit employees who work at least 20 hours a week and are over 18. In 2019, the city contributed about $860,000 from the water fund towards our employee retirement. That's about 1.5 of our expenses in 2019. Okay, moving on. There's a stormwater question here, and I did reach out to the stormwater team. The stormwater utility is located in a different part of the city, but we can still speak to that as it is part of our overall utility. Stormwater funds are being collected from all water users, yet HOAs are left to fend them for themselves in funding for stormwater improvements within their own communities, even though the city planning department may have provided the original guidelines for stormwater management. Why can't the city assist HOAs with stormwater management funding? And the stormwater fund also has limited resources. Typically, HOAs are responsible for the ongoing maintenance of their stormwater infrastructure. Staff is currently completing an asset inventory and a condition assessment of the entire stormwater system so that we can better allocate resources within the stormwater fund in the future. If the cost of acquiring new water sources is an unusually high cost, why isn't the city exploring more options to provide reclaimed or recycled water use to larger water users in the city, such as schools, HOAs, commercial irrigated properties, and thereby increase its potable water supply? And yes, we do have a reclaimed water system. So we take wastewater, we treat it to a higher level, and then we sell that to customers for irrigation purposes. So we have focused a great deal of effort in connecting larger reclaimed users to our system. We are now up to about 140 users. There's been a lot of success since we constructed the reclaimed facility. At this point, we are using almost all of our wastewater, which is the source of our reclaimed water, through the summertime. So we are maxing out how much wastewater we have to turn into reclaimed water for irrigation. Can our bill be based on actual gallons of water used and not to the lowest 1,000 gallons? This needs to be a high priority, and tiered pricing should be suspended until this change is made. And we'll actually talk about gallon-based billing further on in the presentation tonight. And the final customer question is a person who represents the Silo Townhomes HOA. They have 203 units that are on 3 meters. And since they are on a shared meter system, our homeowners and residents do not qualify for the low income or other assistance programs offered by the city. Are there plans to expand that offering out to residents of an HOA? The first thing I would say that's not on the slide per se is that all of our customers, all of our residents are eligible for the COVID financial grant program. So if you've been impacted by COVID, please contact the city and we will get you in touch with the assistance program coordinator who can look at the criteria, see what your situation is, and offer you that grant. Our other assistance programs are income qualifying, and they're currently set up for customers who pay their own water bill directly. Multifamily and multi-unit customers, because they are on large meters, don't pay their own bills. They usually pay that through their HOA or through their apartment complex. So we're looking for ways to expand assistance to those customers. We've already let this customer know about the Neighborhood Landscape Enhancement Grant Program. So if you looked at your weekly email today, you'll see that we have a headline article about our grant program. Our Parks, Recs, and Libraries team runs that, and it's a $5,000 grant for folks who can demonstrate a need to revamp their landscape. And so HOA customers are eligible for that. HOAs are eligible for that. And the deadline for that is March 3rd. So please apply if you're interested in that. Also this year, we are doing a new irrigated audit program directly for our HOAs to help them see what their options are. We know that many of them have large irrigation systems and old irrigation systems, and it can be difficult for them to get their arms around what's needed to revamp or make those more efficient. And so that's something that was called out in our water conservation and efficiency plan that you adopted in December, and we're excited to be offering that for HOAs going forward. I believe that might also answer, I think it was Councilor Voles, you had asked about HOA programs on Monday night, and we sent an email out earlier today or yesterday. Perfect. This customer is now aware of that as well. So here is the list of starred items. This should look familiar to you as we've been collecting those over the last several months. And we will walk through each of these in the next slides. So the first item that we would recommend to you is, of course, that 30-day billing cycle. This is something that you had asked for and that we can do this. So the request is to tighten that time frame for the billing cycle from 27 to 33 days to something shorter than that. And yes, we can do that. We do need a little bit of flexibility. We need to make sure that we still have the appropriate staff resources. Because about 10% of our meters are still the older meters, we're still doing a drive schedule. So while we have the automatic information for the vast majority of our customers who just got their meter replaced this past year, we still have a bunch that are out there that we have to drive to
Chris,
check.
can you advance that slide?
Thank you, Max. There we go. We will we'll come back to you within the next several months to talk more about this, but this is definitely something that we would like to implement in 2021. Gallon-based billing, again, something that you all had asked for and talked about in recent workshops, and we can certainly do that. That is recommended to move forward. Currently, water use is billed in units of 1,000 gallons, and if you recall, we walked through an example sometime last fall, how that looked. So right now, we bill $3.96 per 1,000 gallons in Tier 1. And when the use goes over 1,000, that use gets moved, that additional use gets moved on to the next bill. So for example, in this slide, we're showing 5,685 gallons was used. That gets truncated or cut off at the 1,000 mark, and those 685 gallons then move to the next cycle. So we're recommending a change to bill in units of 1 gallon. So instead of $3.96 on a customer's water bill, it will show a much smaller dollar amount for 1 gallon of use. So we will no longer truncate use. We don't round. It will be for actual use. And we believe that we can implement this in 2021. Everybody seeing the affordability slide? Yes, perfect, thank you. We would recommend maintaining or expanding our existing affordability programs. We have a variety of income qualifying assistance programs for our customers who struggle to pay their bills. There are 4. We have our bill credit program, our hardship program, our emergency or essential repair program, and then our high efficiency toilet and free indoor water use inspection programs. You will receive an information only document on February 8th, I believe, that will talk about our stats from 2020. And we are definitely reaching out to more customers than we ever have before. So we have a person who's dedicated to doing this work, and she has been doing a knockout job of reaching out to customers, working with our revenue service representatives to help those customers who are struggling. That's a fantastic set of programs for our customers. The indoor programs were limited last year, obviously because of COVID, and those organizations are looking forward to moving forward. You approved on Monday night the Mile High Youth Corps program and contract, so thank you for that. That will definitely work towards this. Again, we've been offering a $100 grant to our customers who have been impacted financially by COVID, and we are continuing that program this spring. And then we also offer conservation programs to all of our customers who want to manage their outdoor water use. And again, speaking to that neighborhood enhancement landscape grant, that is a great opportunity for our customers to move forward with making some changes and getting some assistance from the city. So at this point, I will transition over to Chief Financial Officer Larry Dorr to speak about some finance policy tools.
Thank you, Christine. Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and Council. Once again, Larry Dorr, Chief Financial Officer. I haven't been a presenter at previous water workshops, but I have been present and engaged in your process. And I felt that it was time for, given these financing policy tools and related discussion, it was time for me to share with you the work that our entire financial team has been doing in this area. And you'll also hear from our Assistant City Manager and Director of Budget, Chris Lindsey, here in a minute, and also the city's Finance Director, Tammy Hitchens, so that we can share with you our involvement and evaluation and analysis related to the city's financing policy tools related to the utility. Let me just first say that our goal in approaching this is, as mentioned, to recommend the lowest sustainable rate that supports a safe and reliable utility for our community. So let me just start with these policies to say that the utility budget is a little bit different from the other areas of the city budget, and you know how the enterprise is, but I want to say that this involves both capital and operating expenditures, and the capital and operating expenditures are interdependent, but we've put them under a microscope again to make sure that we can recommend the lowest sustainable rate. First, in the area of debt and cash funding for utility projects, let me just say that this tends to take care of itself due to practicality. If the city were to attempt to pay for all of its utility projects in cash, it would take a very long time to pay for all of those projects. and would frankly create a higher rate for our utility payers. In the inverse, if all projects were financed with debt, interest rates would be very, very high, and that would be very difficult to accomplish with the city's creditors. So it's a matter of striking the right balance between the appropriate amount of cash and debt to fund capital projects. And let me say that the city has retained an independent financial advisor involved in the securities markets that can help us understand, as we build our financial pro formas, the right ratio of debt and cash as we attempt to replace capital projects in the future. So those ratios are something that we've examined very carefully with our advisors. Of course, in the next two bullets, we make ourselves available to debt instruments that both conventional and other state and federal programs that allow us to stretch out the amount of debt, and of course, again, in any dimension, lead to the lowest sustainable rate. We look at the debt products that will meet the city's needs and its utility, but also provide customer benefits. This goes simple things that you're familiar with, such as double tax exempt borrowing and so forth, all the way through. And of course, we have a financial model that has a number of assumptions in it. For example, interest rates. Interest rates are changing. They've changed quite a bit recently, and we've adapted the financial model to recognize those changes in the marketplace. Of course, in our assumptions, we could take very aggressive assumptions, we could take very conservative assumptions, but we've been guided to very moderate financial model assumptions in our pro formas. And that has served, we think, the utility very well in the community, and again, lowest sustainable rates. Of course, we've refinanced existing debts whenever possible. We did that last year, and that contributed significantly to the rate for 2021. And we're very good at that. We've got great relationships with the credit markets, credit rating agencies, and also City Council has been very agile and very quick to approve refinancing whenever that has been possible. And there will be future opportunities, even as low as rates are today. And then finally, this last piece about financing policy tools, when we project out 3, 5, 10, 15 years, we have extensive financial pro formas that take into account estimated cost escalation of construction, wages, liability insurance, and all the things that go into running the utility. When we do that, and it is common practice and best practice to have a smooth rate increase over those many years so that the burden of the cost increase is shared over many generations of residents, some who will move to the community and some who will move away over those many years to come. So again, smooth rate increases are driving our financing policy tools, along with those other elements that go into what's present on the slide. Next slide, please, Christine. Reserve policy. And this is another one that we're recommending for further discussion. Of course, we've put, again, under the microscope, all of the things I just described there in financing policy tools. But under utility reserve policy, first, this was adopted by City Council in 2006 and updated in 2011. And I should describe that it really involves two reserves. First, the rate stabilization, and that's recurring income. If there's either a very dry season and lots of water is consumed, or a very wet season and very little, that drop in revenue can be stabilized over time through this RSR, as it's often referred to. Then, of course, we have a capital projects reserve. It's the larger, and it is the one that is necessary should costs escalate or bids and labor costs increase. We have a capital projects reserve, and we've presented the amount in the reserves in previous workshops for you. We'd like to review those. We're recommending a further review and recommendation on an update to the reserve policies. It's been 10 years since the last change. I think it's prudent for a due diligence review of that and potentially a use that that a drawdown of the reserves could be undertaken for this coming year and potentially phased over a period of years for either additional capital projects or mitigating the cost of capital projects, or perhaps some of the affordability programs and conservation programs that Ms. Gray just touched on a moment ago. I just want to close on these two slides, both on utility reserve policy and financing policy, to just say that this will be under continued review and reassessment each year, so that we can make sure that we have, again, the lowest sustainable rate, but also a reliable and safe utility for our city. That means as interest rates change, we will be flexible, we will be agile, and we will adapt. As we're able to borrow for longer periods of time and change the ratio of cash to debt and other inputs to the financing policies, we will continue to do that with that mission in mind. With that, Christine, I turn it back to you for the next slides. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dorr. So the next recommendation that we have is to avoid significant spike in rates. We try to avoid roller coaster rates, and we work very hard to make sure that we are not having huge spiky rate increases. We've talked about the long-term planning that we do, which also includes some hard conversations about what projects we are going to complete in each year and when to have those projects show up. Where we have some flexibility, we try to smooth out our needs. We have worked on this in the past, and we will keep working towards this. The 2019 and 2020 rates were necessary for maintaining a safe and reliable utility. And you'll recall I talked in the last couple of presentations in the fall about how rates are a combination of current and future expenses. That's how we look at rate increase recommendations to you. The 0% in 2022 is simply any artificially low rate increase is going to have some serious impact. So it could be 0% in 2022. What would that do? That would result in a much larger increase in 2023 and out years, and or a deferral of our Water 2025 program. If you recall, the Water 2025 program is our planned replacement of the aging Semper water treatment facility. We've been working on that for many, many years. Semper just turned 50 a couple of years ago. We had some signs in City Hall and signs in front of the plant itself wishing it a happy birthday, but it's getting old and it needs to be replaced. So we're working towards that program, and that is our #1 priority moving forward. And then we have the recommendation to continue the adopted 6 integrated policies. So this might be a familiar slide to you from the fall presentations. We had this language sprinkled throughout some of the slides, and actually this slide itself showed up a couple of times. These 6 policies are intended to maintain a fair and equitable financial approach to rates. So a reminder that for some context, it's fairly common in our industry to do a periodic review of our rates to make sure that they are in alignment, that our customers are being charged the right rate for their impact to our system. And while our staff are subject matter experts in rate calculations, occasionally we will outsource this work and hire a financial firm that this is all they do, is cost of service reviews for utilities. We hired a firm in 2017, and in 2018, they came back to us with a series of recommendations that went along with our 2019 and 2020 recommendations to you. And that included 6 items right here. So we found, as a result of this cost of service study, that our residential and business customers were out of alignment. Our residential customers were not paying as much as they should have been to receive the services they were receiving. And on the flip side, our business customers were paying too much. And so we are working towards realigning that over a period of time. So our rate recommendations in 2019 and 2020 were intended to start that gradual realignment process. The second one was to broaden tier 1. So we increased the amount of water in that first tier by about 50%. We went from 4,000 gallons to 6,000 gallons. In addition, the rates that were charged for tiers 2 and 3 were no longer across the board increases. So in the past, when we've had a rate increase, it has been the same rate increase for each tier, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. In 2019 and 2020, we moved away from that, and we had a different rate increase for each of those tiers that was more reflective of the impact to the system. The third policy was to simplify commercial water use tiers. We had an antiquated system that was not working well for our customers or for the revenue situation. And so we simplified our commercial rate and then implemented a surcharge so that if customers on the business side are using more water than they bought access to, we will surcharge them for that use. The fourth one we talked about in one of the previous workshops as well, which was enhancing our fixed water revenues. So we charge a fixed rate for our customers every month. For our residential customers, that's $13.05 if you have a regular single family meter. That portion of our revenues has represented about 13% of the overall revenues. And for a revenue source that is so variable, most of our revenue comes from our summertime water use because it's hot in the summer, people are watering their yards. But there are summers where it's not hot and it's not dry, and I'm thinking about 2019. We want to make sure that we have a stable revenue source so that we have more stability with our revenues over the long term. And we are looking at enhancing that percentage from that 13% in 2018, 2019 to 20% over the course of about 8 years. So our rate recommendations, again, in 2019 and 2020 were designed to start that gradual phase-in. We wanted to continue the single sewer rate that is charged to all of our customers in the city. As you know, our wastewater goes to two different entities actually for treatment. If you live north of 92nd Avenue, your wastewater goes up to our city's Big Dry Creek wastewater treatment facility. If you live south of 92nd Avenue, it goes to the regional metro plant. And so there are different costs associated with each treatment facility. We have maintained a single sewer rate for all of our city's residents to maintain consistency. And then finally, we implemented a 2,000 gallon minimum monthly readiness to serve wastewater charge. So on the water side of the revenue equation, we have that fixed charge. On the wastewater side, we don't. And so this is a similar type of revenue stability mechanism so that we have a stable wastewater revenue source. And I will turn the next slide over to Assistant City Manager Chris Lindsey.
Good evening, Council. Thank you, Christine. Staff strives to recommend the lowest sustainable rates that support both a safe and a reliable utility. The Utility Fund Capital Improvement Program and the operating budgets represent the work needed to maintain public health and safety, our levels of customer service, and the reliability of the utility system. Our customers own the utility system, and we are the stewards. We have a fiduciary responsibility to ensure the reliability and the sustainability of the system. And as noted on the right-hand side of the slide, the 2020 community survey continued to highlight that drinking water and sewer services are higher quality and of higher importance to the community. As such, staff recommends a continued review of the Utility Capital Improvement Program and the operating budgets as part of the 2022 rate setting process and the budget process. Christine, if you'll swap us to the next slide, please. Now we'll proceed into those levers that staff believe are imprudent and not recommended to utilize for the 2022 rate setting process. I'll invite Tammy Hitchens, the city's finance director, to go through the next couple of slides.
Thank you, Mr. Lindsey. So we're going to talk a little bit about debt and some of our financial policies around debt. And our original debt policy was written, well, not the original, the last debt policy was written and approved by City Council back in 2011, back when the other policy was updated. This policy was written with assistance with our financial advisors, as Larry mentioned, who are now known as Hilltop Securities. They're a nationwide firm, and they're able to inform us as to best practices from around the country because they're, like I said, a nationwide firm. And one of the ratios that is outlined in the debt policy is the debt coverage ratio. And the policy calls for 1.5 times coverage. And so what does that mean? So the debt service, the debt coverage ratio is basically saying how much money do you have to make your debt payment from operations, basically. What revenue do you bring in? What are your operations and maintenance expenses? What you have left is what you have to pay your debt service. So for an example, assume like you have a $20 mortgage payment and your paycheck is $100. You have $60 of monthly everyday household expenses like groceries, utilities, entertainment, transportation. And so that leaves you $40. You say a $100 paycheck, $60 worth of expenses, leaves you $40. In that case, you actually have 2 times the amount of money that you need to make your $20 mortgage payment. And so that is referred to as 2 times coverage. If you have a $70 in monthly expenses, that leaves you with a total of $30. And so in that case, you would have 1.5 times coverage. So this means you would have money to make your mortgage payment and also a little extra in case you had to put some money in savings or making a capital improvement on your house, such as like putting in a hot water heater or a new furnace or something like that. So in the city's case, at the end of 2019, we had a little over 5 times coverage. As I mentioned, this is calculated by taking our total revenue, and that actually includes tap fees, and subtracting out our operations and maintenance expenses. And 5 times sounds really extreme compared to the policy, which is 1.5. But you have to remember that the city uses our rates to also pay for pay-as-you-go capital projects. So that's one of the reasons why we have a little bit higher debt service coverage than we actually have as far as our policy goes. And so we're going to go to the next slide, please, Chris. And here we'll talk specifically about our numbers at the end of 2019. You can see our coverage ratio was 5. We had liquidity at about 110 million. And liquidity is just basically how much cash do you have or liquid assets do you have that you can just pay that's available to pay for your bills. And then the last information on here is our debt to capitalization. And that just means how much debt do you have in relationship to our capital assets. And at the end of 2019, we were sitting at about 19%. However, if we take those numbers and we assume issuing $125 million in debt in 22, those numbers drop. You can see where the debt service coverage ratio drops to around 3%. It doesn't really impact our liquidity that much, but our debt to capitalization goes up to 42%. So why is this important? So in looking at the next 4 columns, you can see like what the rating agencies are looking for having an extremely strong rating, which would be a AAA, a very strong rating, which is a AA, strong, AA minus, and then adequate A. And frankly, there are other numbers, but we never want to go there. Or other letters, I should say. So looking at that, for AAA rating, they would like to see a coverage ratio greater than 1.6. And so you can tell that we have very, very strong numbers at this point. So let's go to, and why does this make a difference? So if you go to the next slide, please, Chris. You can see that the difference, so there's an inverse relationship between the amount of interest that we paid versus our actual debt rating. So the higher the rating, less interest you'd pay. So we took assuming again, $125 million of debt, looking at the different rates, getting this information from Hilltop Securities, and these rates were early December rates, and using a 20-year amortization of the debt. And you can see the difference that a AAA has versus a AA. It would cost us in interest an extra $2.8 million. And then if it went from a AAA to an A, it would cost us about $6.4 million additional in interest. So that's why it's important that we have as high as rating as we can get. We do know that with the addition of debt, most likely our rating is going to drop a little bit. But we want to keep it as high as we can. So that's that's kind of why we have some of these policies and why we would not recommend, at least, I mean, not recommend changing the policy. The policy, frankly, at 1.5 times is actually fairly low. Our number is greater than that. So, you know, perhaps there's a little room in that. But again, as I mentioned, with issuing new debt, that number is going to drop as it is. So that's kind of a little bit on the interest rates and our debt and why it's important to maintain as high a rating as we can. With that, I believe Chris Lindsey is coming back on.
Thank you, Tammy. I'd like to talk next about the use of the general fund for utility fund expenses, either through a subsidy or a tax. Industry best practice and financial best practice support the current system where user-driven services are paid for with user-paid fees. There are also legal limitations. The charter states that rates and charges are fixed to at least meet all the operating costs of such a utility. There are also impacts on the other side of the ledger. As I've spoken to you about previously, the general fund has an infrastructure gap of its own. We've highlighted a few of these items, like the replacement of the municipal court building and the lack of street repair and facilities maintenance funding, amongst others. Using the general fund to subsidize the utility fund means that some of the general fund services have to be reduced or general fund revenues need to be increased just to maintain. Staff believes that a general fund subsidy of the utility fund, even within Tabor limits, is not in the city's best interest. And with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Christine Gray now.
Thank you, Mr. Lindsey. So we'll wrap up with a couple of more slides, but we don't recommend making changes to the water rate structure for a number of reasons. This recommendation to not change the structure aligns with maintaining those 6 integrated policies that I discussed earlier. If you recall, in addition to increasing that volume allocation in Tier 1 by 50%, we also increased our tiered rates differently. So this is something that we've already implemented fairly recently. We would like to update it and review it over a longer period of time. Changes to rate structures that take place in very short periods of time are confusing to our customers, and we want to make sure we have some consistency for them on that. And then a certain amount of revenue is required to fund the utility no matter how we charge our customers. We have, as we've been mentioning in this presentation, the mission to provide a safe and reliable utility for our customers. And you'll see at the very bottom, we've actually updated our banner language, delivering safe, high quality, compliant, and reliable drinking water and wastewater services. So we have a certain amount of money that goes into providing that service to our customers. Rate changes, rate structures impact our customers. So if we eliminated, for example, Tier 3, that means that the revenue that we generate from that tier would have to get put onto Tiers 1 and Tier 2, excuse me. And it might also mean cutting or reducing CIP projects. Another example is if we implemented a flat rate, that means that we are no longer sending a water conservation signal to our customers. And water conservation is a very important philosophy for this city. And then our lower water users and our average water users would be paying for higher water use. So this is, again, something that we would not recommend to move forward. And then finally, we would not recommend renegotiating our wholesale water contract with our neighbor, the City of Federal Heights. Our contract currently requires that their rate increase tracks with our rate increase. So when our rates went up 10%, their rate went up 10%. Their rate structure is similar to ours. They have a tier system as well. And then the rate that we are charging them currently is fair and accurate based on a recent third-party evaluation. We had a financial advisor take a look at our contract with them, the cost of service that they impact our system with, and the rate that they are paying is fair and accurate right now. So for some context, our budgeted revenues from Federal Heights are about $2.3 million in 2021. And I will now move this forward to next steps, and I'll ask Max Kirschbaum to speak.
Thank you, Chris. And can you move that forward to the next slide? So this is the last of the content slides to discuss before we address your questions and engage in the conversation among yourselves and any that we might be able to help answer. But if you look at the timeline, I'd like to bracket the beginning and the end of this timeline first. We are at this 5th workshop this evening on January 28th, and we would like to be able to bring to you for first reading and for second reading rate recommendations for 22 in the May to June timeframe. And you'll see that underneath the arrow there to have that second reading in that late May, early June timeframe. So between now and then, what we would do is, based on the discussion this evening and the policy items that we received direction to move forward with, we will begin the information campaign with our both residential and commercial customers. And again, to emphasize the plan that would ultimately end with the rate recommendations to take care of what we own as a city. We would like to come back to you in the March timeframe. That'll be a busy period for sure. There's a lot of other activity going on, but we would like to come back to you in a study session in mid-March after we've had an opportunity to finalize what our CIP program will look like for the next 5 years, and be able to take in some of that feedback from our customers, roll that in, and bring to you specific recommendation of rates in March. From that point forward, then again, it would be another opportunity for engagement in the community with our customers, where they would have an opportunity to see and comment on the rates that we have presented to you in that March study session. So we'd have then the opportunity to take your feedback from that we receive on those very specific rates for 2022 from our customers, and then, as I said, come to you for first reading in the May timeframe, and second reading hopefully 2 weeks later at the next city council. So that would be kind of a late May, early June timeframe for first and second readings. So that's how the timeline we would recommend to lay out to get this wrapped up by the early June time period. That's all I have for the timeline, and I believe that is our last content slide.
All right, thanks, Max. Christine, thank you, and the rest of the guys who were involved in the presentation. Council, we're going to take a short bio as requested, but in the meantime, if you've got questions in your mind that you haven't put into the chat, please do so we can try to address those. Allow staff to review the questions that are in there now. Be prepared to go with those. We'll just take them from the top, and then once we've done the ones in the chat, we'll go back and see if anybody has any other comments or questions before we move on. It's let's just say it's 7 p.m. Let's take about 5 after 7. It gives you about 7 or 8 minutes. So everybody could be back by 7:05. We are in recess at this time. All right, council, I have 7:05. Christine, are you and the rest of the team all back so you can hear the questions?
Yes, I believe we are.
All right, let's go start with what's in the chat piece. We'll get those first. I think Councilor Scully had some of the first ones. I think the first one was on slide 10.
Yes, I
Okay.
see that one.
All right, you can start with that one and we'll go through the process.
Certainly. So, Councilor Scully, does expanding affordability plan include a LEAP-like program where low income can apply for assistance? And that is how our current assistance program is structured. Right now, we are auto-enrolling anybody who is eligible for LEAP. And so they can automatically qualify for our assistance programs. I don't know if that answers your question.
And so if they apply for assistance, they get $100, is that, and that's a one-time thing?
So right now, of the 4 programs we have, one is a bill credit program, and that's where customers who currently qualify for LEAP can get $180 per year, $15 per monthly bill credit. COVID is a separate program altogether. That's the $100 program where anybody, not income qualifying customers, but any customer who's eligible, who's been financially impacted by COVID can receive $100. So bill credit is for income qualifying customers. COVID is for all customers.
Okay, and I apologize, I thought I heard you say during these past water rate deep dives that we've been doing that, but I can't verify that you said it, so I'll have to ask the question. Do we have a program where you can have the average figured out and you can pay the average rather than paying like a summer, having it hike so much in the summer?
I will defer to Tammy Hitchens to answer that question because I believe we have a handful of customers who currently have that scenario with paying their bill. Before she comes on, I will say that that's a tricky thing to do because at the end of any year, a customer has to true up. So if they have an average that they're paying over the course of the year and their bill would have been higher than at the end of the year, which is typically December, January time period, that's when they'd have to true up if they owed more. That type of scenario is also challenging from a conservation standpoint because if you're paying the same amount every month, you don't see what the impact is for your water use, and so there's not a conservation signal to provide to the customers there. And I don't know if Tammy has any more thoughts on that.
Yeah, so right now, the way that our utility billing system is, and you've heard that we're in the process of updating the utility billing system. So as we speak, the level billing, or what we would probably call budget billing, the program doesn't work real well. We'll have to evaluate that program once we get the system upgraded. Again, as Christine mentioned, there's some issues with the other, not necessarily related to the payment of dollars, but more along the conservation and then the truing up piece of it. So we'll evaluate that when once we get the new system up, which we're targeting the end of March for that. So
Nice. Okay. Thank you.
Chris, if you'll advance to, looks like the next question is slide number 11.
Yes.
First question.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to address this question, but I want to make sure I'm in correct order, sir. If you're seeing it in the chat as well, I think it's related to slide 11, as Mr. Kirschbaum described. Do you have that, Mayor?
Yes.
Okay. Let me go ahead and read that for our audience. The question is, can we consider reducing the reserve we keep to supplement the CIP program? As an example, take $10 million, transfer to CIP, and then do a multi-year rate structure that is consistent so people can adjust to knowing planned rates for say up to a 5-year projection. Let me just say, I couldn't necessarily comment on the dollar amount, but what we're looking for tonight and what we've recommended is direction to adjust and change the reserve policy for both capital and our revenue stabilization. If that's council's direction, we will make a recommendation on how to do that. And I would recommend that over a phased period of time. I couldn't necessarily comment on the dollar amount, and of course, council would give direction on the use, which could do, as you described, transfer to the CIP to impact the rate structure, or those funds in reserve could be used to supplement the affordability programs and some of the conservation efforts. And I know that's all fresh for you, but for the audience, just this past Monday, we had council approve legislation for things like low flow toilets and garden in a box and turf removal and things like that. So the short answer is that can be done, but we'd like to get your direction that is an idea that we can continue to explore. And then I'm going to go ahead and handle the next question, Mayor, unless there are some follow-ups, or did I address
Let
that?
me just comment on the $10 million is just a number. I picked something so we'd have something to talk about. It doesn't mean that that's a good number, a bad number, indifferent. The concept is just to look at, can we reduce our overall reserve, which I think we can at council direction, but at what level? That would be something that staff would come back and say, okay, we're going to reduce it by this much, take that money, put it into our infrastructure program, our CIP, getting more updates and fixes to our aging system by increasing the amount of money available for those construction contracts. And in order to pay that back, stabilize a rate that we would say, okay, for the next 5 years, we're going to set our rates at X number, somewhere. So it's not in the high single digits, but we're definitely not into double digit. But something we can count on, looking at the ratepayers saying that for the next 5 years, I know I'm going to pay this kind of an increase every year. It might be somewhere between 4.5 and 7. That's the number I just picked out of the air because it sounds funny and it sounds odd to work with, but it's just something to get a target on. Looking at something like that, which would allow us to do more of the infrastructure upgrade to our system, have a rate instruction to our rate payers that this is going to be steady for the next 5 years. We don't have this up and down motion of, well, in 2022, it's going to be this, and 23, that's going to be this, and then for the next 5 or 6 years, it's seesawing up and down, or potentially just escalating. That way we leave them with a guaranteed rate that for the next 5 years you do that. I don't know that that would have any effect on our bond ratings. But to your point, over the next couple of years, as we move into 2025, when we issue those larger bond ratings, that is going to have an effect on our AAA, AA, or whatever, because of the bonds we're going to have to raise. But I'm talking about two different things. I'm talking about a reserve account that we can bring down, utilize a set rate that the payers will know is going to be there for the next few years. I don't think those two actions will have an effect on our bond rating because those don't require any issuing of bonds. And if we renegotiate our bond rates, which we've been doing pretty well for the last few years, that interest rates have gone down, it hasn't had an effect on us and our rating from the AAA where we're at today. But I do recognize that when we start to issue big bonds for the 2025 or large infrastructure pieces, that will have some level of an effect on our bond rating. I don't want you to use the numbers. It's just a talking point. My interest is more, can we look at that and have you come back with a recommendation to the council?
Thank you, Mayor. If I may, and there may be other questions from council on this concept, and I think it'd be appropriate for us, we could talk about this particular subject and get your direction since we're on it. I did want to make clear what you've just stated, and that is, yes, the city utility, as debt is issued for upcoming projects, will transition to a different rating. And that's primarily based on the total debt to total capital, or kind of like home equity, if I could call it that way, will be changing, and then we'll be changing our position in those ratings. However, we will still, even if the reserve policy is changed and used for the purposes you've just described, that wouldn't make the rating go any lower. And again, it's driven by the debt to capital ratio, not the reserve ratio. So that is why it remains here as recommended. If the reserves are changed, it would not change the rating down to those levels that Ms. Hitchens described as we don't want to go there because the cost benefit becomes detrimental. But again, I would welcome additional discussion from the City Council and consensus direction. We can continue to explore this. And if there are other thoughts about what the reserve might be used for, sir.
All right, so let's finish up the other question you wanted to answer.
Yes, thank you. The next question, if I may, is do we have details on deferment of water 2025? Can we see difference of what would be deferred based on specific percentage increments? This is from Councilor Scully. And let me just say, and I do see my colleague here, Director Kirschbaum, who's come on, but I will say that the financial pro forma takes into account all of the cost benefit of capital replacement. So if 2025 is deferred, there are maintenance costs for the existing water plant. And what we've done throughout our pro formas is keep in mind the lowest sustainable rate that will support safe and reliable utility. So the timing of that isn't necessarily, based on anything else other than, again, safe, reliable, and at the lowest sustainable rate. So I think we could do some modeling that would demonstrate that in the future. But I think that you'll find that the timing of that and the deferment, we have cost escalation of construction, we have maintenance cost of existing facilities, and those lines intersect in the current timing that's proposed. Mr. Kirschbaum, I don't know, I see that you've cameraed on, sir. Perhaps you have some additional things on this, sir.
Thank you, Larry. Agree with each of those points. I would add that although we at this point this evening we don't have a specific list of projects over the 5-year out-year period, we will present that to you with the recommended rates in March. So you'll see the full list of projects both on water and wastewater side. But what I can generally say as we fine-tune that list and scopes and prices, which is an activity that we're engaged in right now, that the water 2025 impact to the whole program is nearly 50% of that CIP program over that 5-year period. So it is a big chunk of this next 5 years worth of investment. We believe that it's very critical to keep that project on a timeline for a couple of reasons. Larry mentioned cost escalation. We know from industry experience that for a project of this nature, we would expect to see about a 4% cost escalation each year. So if we defer it, just realize that those costs will add up on the new construction. Related to that, however, though, and why we feel passionate about keeping Water 2025 on track is we also know that Semper Water Treatment Facility is not able to satisfactorily treat water that is subject of a wildland fire. So that's a risk that we live with now. It's a risk that we can buffer somewhat with Stanley Lake, but just realize that there are significant impacts with solids in a wildfire scenario. So we are eager to keep moving forward with Water 2025 so that we can overcome that known risk in the way we produce water today. Thanks.
And I will speak to Councilor Scully's question about, does anyone in the city use less than 2,000 gallons of water per month? And the answer is yes. We have about 2,500 to 3,000 customers who use less than 2,000 gallons a month. Part of the adoption of that minimum readiness to serve charge, again, functions similar to that fixed monthly fee that we charge on the water side. So on the water side, we charge $13.05. Regardless of whether you use any water, whether you're home or not, we charge that because it's a readiness to serve charge. On the wastewater side, again, we don't have that fixed in place monthly fee. And so we are charging a 2,000 gallon minimum because just like the water system, the wastewater system is there ready to serve our customers when they are home, when they are not home. And 2,000 gallons was something that we determined to be the minimum that we should charge our customers.
Okay. How did you determine that?
I'm thinking back to our cost of service study and what is the average use of our customers, and then what dollar amount represents a similar type of monthly fee that we charge on the water side of things.
I see. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Let's see. The mayor has asked a question about the fact that we have a number of out of city districts that receive water from Westminster. They each have different adders based on previously negotiated contracts. Should we reevaluate those adders or those contracts? So we do charge a different rate to out of city customers. Shaw Heights is not in city limits technically, and so they have a different rate. And out of city unincorporated Jefferson County customers also have a different rate. Higher than the city's in-city rate. I'll ask Max to chime in a little bit about this. One of my understandings is that some of those customers did not pay us a tap fee when they attached to our system. And so in order to reflect their buy into our system, we have a higher rate for them. Some of those contracts were also negotiated quite a while ago and were based on a number of factors in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s that have moved forward, and so that's how those contracts were set. Max, I'll turn over to you.
Chris, I think you said it well. Part of the evolution of both of those groups of customers was based on the fact that you couldn't double charge them a tap fee or something of that nature as we added them to the system. So there is I believe for the out of city unincorporated, it's a 1.25 charge, and for Shaw Heights, it's a 1.1 charge. We feel that those historical adders, as you said, Mr. Mayor, are adequate and should be maintained.
Do we have any adders for Highland Hills?
Or Highland Hills as a park and rec district?
Yeah.
Well, there is a rate that is based for irrigation. So much of their water use is based on irrigation. So there is a rate structure set for irrigation.
Does that include Water World?
Water World is really a non-issue for us because as we discussed with the Federal Heights wholesale contract, we sell water to Federal Heights at a wholesale rate that's similar to and consistent with the rates that we charge our residential customers, but we don't have any role in how they use that water. In other words, so certainly some of their water goes to Water World without a doubt, but the rates that they pay on that wholesale contract are similar to and based on our own residential rates.
The other one that I'm aware of is Brighton, but that's strictly a pass-through. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. That is a that again, it stems from a longstanding agreement and a decree in water court, but essentially it is a pass-through where we facilitate a passage of money between Thornton and Brighton.
Okay.
It
All right, let me
doesn't have
turn.
economic impact to us.
All right. So I know that a couple of people indicated that they were holding questions. Counselor Smith, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Burke, could you walk me through the answer again on the deferment? It didn't quite make sense to me how you were answering that, and if we really kind of dived into what that looked like. And then my other question is, this came up in a council meeting a couple meetings ago where I didn't feel like we had any kind of updates as far as a water 2025. And as part of these rate discussions, I feel like that ties into the bigger picture of rates and how we move forward. Do we have any sense of idea of when we can get that presentation as far as where we're at in this program to really have a full understanding of Water 2025 and how it relates to the next several years? So just two questions. One, to help me with the first answer, and then two, presentation on Water 2025.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Christine, please, if you would kindly go to the financing policies slide, that would be helpful. And that's what's referring to. The original question, it might be useful for the audience, was from Councilor Scully. It says, do we have details on deferment of Water 2025? Can we see difference of what would be deferred based on specific percentage increments? And so let's see, Water 2025 is one of a number of capital improvement program projects within the utility. There are many. There are many pumps and pipes and all manner of different capital projects. But of course, Water 2025 involves the retirement of the Semper Water facility and creation of its replacement for the next generation of our residents. So let's see. The idea is that I think Julie Kaler described it in the past as sort of, as the car ages, the maintenance costs increase significantly, right? The transmission gets older, the engine block gets older, and things like this. Same thing with our water plant, as was described earlier, has reached 50 years. So part of our financial analysis that comes into our model and the various assumptions that go into it really take into account the aging condition of the infrastructure, its cost to maintain, and then its cost to replace. Replacement costs for materials, design, expertise, and engineering are increasing rapidly. And of course, construction labor, oh my gosh, probably the most rapidly increasing component of this capital project. So what our analysis has shown us, and it's multi-year, and it's been reviewed by independent consultants and creditors, is the idea of when is the right time optimally, again, in order to have the lowest sustainable rate for our residents, when is the optimal time to replace that? And we've found that intersection, that's why we've had it as Water 25, the intersection where the cost benefit is the greatest is in 2025. And so what I would expect to see, and we'll provide information, as I mentioned earlier when I got the question from Councilor Scully, we will in future workshops or a future council action on the subject show how a deferment would lead to specific percentage increases and as described in the question by Councilor Scully. So again, it's a matter of as things age, replacement cost or maintenance of that aged item, eventually the car it just becomes too costly for it to maintain given its amount of use. So that's sort of that bit on deferment. In terms of an update on Water 2025, I would think it's probably a prudent idea during the city's budget process to come later this year when we get into all of the capital projects in open space and other areas of the city, facilities, and of course our utility. I would think that's probably an appropriate time for us to describe where we are with Water 2025 and holistically other major projects within the utility. So we could certainly do that at some time in the future. I think that's probably the most appropriate as council's looking holistically across all of the funding needs of the city. And certainly we would have more information at that time.
Okay, thank you. That makes sense. I hear what you're saying as far as having it in a presentation further down budget line wise, but I think it would be prudent, especially if council is looking at rate recommendations and looking at the overall project and making decisions as we did a couple weeks ago. I would very much appreciate if it was sooner, especially if we're making policy on it. But like I said, I do understand what you're saying as far as down the line, but we can talk about that at some other point. But the other questions I have as far as water rates go is I know that Tammy had mentioned that in 2019 we were at 5 times, and correct me if I'm terminology wise, I'm not as great as you all are in that respect, but in 2019 we were at 5 times the amount. Is that something that can be rolled over from year to year, or how does that work as far as we're at 5 times the amount in 2019? Can we then, I'm sure we use some of that to balance down our interest rates in 2020 so that we could keep rates the same. What does that look like in years out that we're so far? Because 1.5 and 5 seem like a far gap.
Thank you. I'd like to comment on the question, and then Tammy, please feel free to add any additional information. And Ms. Gray, if you could go to the debt coverage ratio. I know that's a little bit of an obscure subject, but Christine, if you could go to that particular slide, I want to make sure that we're referencing the same one. But let's see, the debt coverage ratio really amounts to any borrower's capacity to repay the monthly or annual bond payment or loan payment, if it's your house or car, that kind of a thing. So the income divided by the amount of the payment is that ratio. And the city's ratio is high at the moment because we're anticipating and preparing to undertake a Water 2025, which will involve significant borrowing and significant cash as well, contributed toward the project. So, thank you, Christine. Yes, you've got the right slide here. So yes, as of the end of 2019, 5.13, but projecting to go to 2.9 as the borrowings increase, the payments will increase. And as those payments increase, it's taking up more annual income to repay those each year. So, but again, we're not recommending any change in policy here. We're not recommending anything that, would be any more aggressive and take that cost of interest yet even higher. So that was the reason for the debt service coverage ratio policy as is to remain unchanged. It's not too aggressive, not too conservative, but is moderate and serves the need of the residents at that level. So again, it's prepared, it's poised to change quite a bit here in a short period of time. Tammy, I don't know if you had any additional comments related to that or could add any additional context, please.
Yeah, so I guess with respect to like rolling forward, it's really it's a result of revenues over expenses, operations, maintenance expenses. And as Larry said, the other component, of course, is how much the debt service payment is. So as long as those three things remain the same, that coverage ratio is gonna stay the same. So, and quote unquote, carry forward to the next year. But if any one of those three elements, revenues, expenses, or the debt payment change, then that's gonna have an impact on the ratio.
Okay. Okay. So to bring it into simple terms, when we're talking about complex things, I would assume that Semper, from the time that it was built till now, is paid off, correct? Like, we're talking about a water treatment facility we have in our system that's paid off. So bringing it back to the car analogy, as far as, is the car paid off and now we're just dealing with maintenance? So is the maintenance cost then more than what a new car payment would be, right? So the new treatment plant would be. What does that, do we have numbers as far as what would be the continual maintenance cost on Semper versus what the actual new car payment would be? Because now this is a lifetime, what feels like a lifetime of payments versus just a potential steady maintenance payment, if that makes sense.
Councilor Smith, this is next person. Could I take a shot at that answer by saying that this was the purpose of the water treatment master plan that we completed in 2014. It evaluated about 8 or 9 different options to include maintaining Semper and making large capital investments in it as an option. All of those options are contained in that master plan study. The result from that was the decision made in 2015 to pursue the most cost-effective of all of those options was to construct the new plant. We began down that road in 2014 really is when we began making investments, and to date, contracts that you have as a city council and your predecessor city council have authorized, we're about 8 or 9 contracts into that effort to build the new water treatment plant. And maybe to circle back to an earlier question you had, when we bring the rate recommendation in March, it will very specifically show the 3 line items of construction necessary for water 2025. They will be in there by line item and dollar amount and timing.
Okay, thank you very much. It's helpful to try and understand all this. I'm going to defer my questions until people ask more, and I'll probably have more. So thank you for answering.
Councilor Demott.
If I may, I beg your pardon, Councilor Demott. I just, I see in the chat a question on this particular slide and subject, and I thought I might address that. Sir, I beg your pardon.
Go ahead.
Okay. Just on this slide, while it's up and on this subject, I thought I would cover it. There was a question that just came through on the chat during the Councilor Smith's questions, and it's from Mayor Pro Tem. It reads, the question is, after the bond rating in 2022, the debt to capitalization ratio will put us in a AA-. Do we feel that having a higher coverage ratio would avoid being downgraded? And I would say, I don't believe that's the case related to the debt service coverage ratio, Mayor Pro Tem. I should also say that these ranges, these are proprietary to the ratings agencies. Now, obviously our financial advisors see the ratings and see how various bonds are rated and the relative ratios and so forth. So as you pointed out, it would put that just over the 20 to 35% debt to capitalization ratio, but that's the capitalization of the amount of the value of the fixed assets or the home equity is a real key variable that's difficult to forecast and predict. Not difficult, but can move a little bit. So I wanted to just say first, related to this one question, that again, these ranges are pretty consistent, but not necessarily absolute in terms of impacting what the debt, having a much higher debt service coverage ratio may or may not, but not likely impact one of the other elements of the grid being slightly outside of the range. Tammy, would you comment, if you can, if for example, debt service coverage ratio were one thing, but debt to capitalization were another, would it intersect or change anything at all? Tammy?
Well, I would just say that, you know, the rating agencies, they look at all of these in totality. So, you know, probably one dip in one of the, and in addition, there's many other things that they look at as well. But so they could look at one and one may not even have an impact. But, you know, then you add a second or third, then it's probably going to have an impact. You know, you really have to, we'll have to wait and see what they think of this. And in fact, we do have a report from when we got the last AAA rating, and we can certainly send that out, and you can read through and see kind of the things that they're looking for. So yeah, that is going to probably bring our rating down. But one, it's in totality. So if our coverage ratio is pretty decent, but our debt to capitalization, it may have a little bit of an offset. So I think that, you know, the rating agencies, they look at things the way they look at them, and you know, that I've never been a rating agency employee, so I don't know how they do it.
Well, I appreciate that. I want to make sure, because what I heard you just answer is a little bit different than what I heard CFO Dorr answer. And my question was actually what you just summed up, is that, you know, if one of these metrics pushes us into where the AA- territory, are we kind of buoyed back up by having strength in the other two metrics, having a strong coverage ratio, having strong liquidity? And it sounds like, while you can't guarantee it, they look at the whole picture. These aren't absolute ranges.
Right, because I mean, you might be looking at, you know, you've got just extremely strong. Well, you know, do they average it? Like if you get an A and an F, does that average to a C? You know, how do they do that? So yeah, so I think that they look at it in totality. And so if you got enough AAAs on your scorecard versus, you know, a AA-, maybe you end up at a AA. So I'm pretty sure they don't take the lowest possible, you know, element and say, oh, they got an A- in their debt to capitalization, so we're going to do AA-. They'd look at it in total.
Okay, and I don't think CFO Dorr saw two up. There was a question from me as well on this slide, and it was in regards to the coverage ratio. And with the coverage ratio, it would seem natural, like in anticipation of a large bonding, as we're anticipating in 22, that number would grow, because otherwise we could potentially see large swings of our rating. Is that correct? So for instance, if that number was at 1.6 and we went to do that $125 million issuance in 2022, in addition to the debt capitalization being pretty high, we would see our coverage ratio extremely low, well below the 1.6.
As far as, I mean, so we have actually in the past had our coverage ratio dip, because remember I told you that the coverage ratio was revenues, which included tap fees. Well, we've had years where we had no development, and so that tap fee was pretty much non-existent, and that did have a big impact on what our coverage ratio was. And just like I guess I would say that the rating agencies will look at, the different components. In addition, they probably look more at trends too. So if in that particular year we said, our coverage ratio dipped because we didn't have the tap fees, they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. So they'll look at that. And so as far as the coverage ratio, again, it's just it's the revenues minus operating and maintenance expenses, and then divide it or figure that out in relationship to the debt service payment.
Right. I'm just saying if it was already low, if we always ran at 1.6, we would quickly get into a situation where we were over leveraged when we had massive needs.
Yeah, yes, if we were already low and when we did some of the stuff, yes.
Okay, so we have to kind of plan, when do we take debt versus our revenue? We can't, right? It would be impossible to keep that number at the exact same amount unless we always had the exact same, we knew exactly what our revenues would be and matched it with our debt service, right?
Correct.
Might be a good time for me to jump in and just make a comment. The graph that you have in front of you is a representation across various rating agencies and how they make these decisions. And in answering these questions, I want to provide assurance to all of you, Council, Mayor Pro Tem, and to our community that we'll weigh these things as a staff in the moment as all these decisions across the multiple years of this construction happen, and make determinations on debt to expense ratio, and when and if we move forward on individual capital projects based on a whole number of scenarios, some of which aren't even being discussed tonight, like the economy, and whether it's a good time to do construction. So I just want to provide assurance to you. I know I hear my staff trying to be very exact in giving exact answers to these, but the thing you have to count on is that they're going to weigh all of these decisions in the moment, and these will also be things that we'll be reporting on when we bring forward the various council actions. So I just wanted to add that, if I could, please.
Mayor Pro Tem, did that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, the root of my question was just the fact that it was at a higher ratio right now than where we have set, our goal doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't necessarily indicate a problem. It might indicate planning for when we took out the debt.
Yeah, I think your point is clear as too, is that nothing stays the same. Stuff moves around, and you have to take the situation you're in at the time you're trying to make that decision, and what are the parameters you're dealing with. Councilor DeMott, you had a question or something?
I have a handful of questions. First thing I wanted to ask, and I'm assuming that we haven't got the answer to this yet because I've asked a couple times and I didn't see it in the packet. At some point, I still would like to see what the impact to our water levels or amount that we have in stock available for new building because of anything that is a comp plan change from 2013 comp plan moving forward, because we've had a handful of actual changes where we've deviated from the comp plan between 2013 and now, and I would like to see what that has actually done to our water supply. So at some point, I hope that we can see that answer. A couple things from tonight's slides. So, and this is to Director Kirschbaum. When I toured the wastewater facility, we were talking about reclaimed water and how much we had. And tonight we heard that we were at capacity. And I just want to make sure that I understand what that means, because you had mentioned that we had more capacity, but my understanding is we don't have any more infrastructure to deliver the water that we could actually create at that plant. Am I understanding that correctly?
Councilor DeMont, you have that about right. There was two issues that kind of limit the amount of reclaimed water that we can put into our system. One of those is, and I think we talked about it that day of the tour, that we have a limitation on storage. We do not have a storage tank for that reclaimed water. So the we kind of deliver water by the order, and it's as called for, we produce it and put it into the system. So that would be an enhancement that is in our Reclaim Master Plan to build that storage. That's one point. But the other point also is that by law and regulation, we have a requirement to put a certain amount of water returned to the river flow. So we always have to be mindful that we meet our requirement to actually put some of that wastewater effluent back into Big Dry to flow downstream. So those are the kind of the two things that kind of put a limit on how much and how much farther we can go. So at the current point, with the system that is in place for distribution of our reclaimed water, we're about at a maximum, if you will. I mean, that could change going forward, but for now, we're at about the maximum number of customers that we can handle.
And that totally makes sense. And I think that's good information for people to understand, especially the point about that we are obligated to put a certain amount back in to the water, for people downstream. But with that being said, do you know, and if you don't know this tonight, you can get this answer back to me, but I'm curious, do you know how much more capacity we could get with storage versus what we have to actually put back out downstream?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I don't have that calculation.
That's fine. In the future, I'm sure we'll hear, but I'd be curious to know because I think it's good for the overall discussion.
I would say that's certainly an integral part of the Reclaim Master Plan. We'll get back to you on that.
Great, thank you. In this, I have a slide number, but I don't think it really matters. We've talked quite a bit about the new plant in the 2025, and I understand, some of the reasons behind it, and I understand, you're always looking at infrastructure that we have today and saying, what's it cost to replace it? What's it cost to maintain it? And we always are going to have to make those decisions. Even if you build a new one, at some point, somebody's going to have to make that decision. What I'm curious about, though, is, and it sounds like 2014 is when that decision was made, which was one of my questions. So you kind of answered that with some of the earlier answers you were giving. But I'm curious, prior to 2014, wildfires, for anybody who's lived here any amount of time, that's not something new to us. I mean, the whole state has unfortunately dealt with it quite a bit. So I'm just curious, like between us and other municipalities in Colorado who have like systems that we have in Semper, I mean, I have to imagine there was a plan in place to take care of a fire in the watershed before, if we didn't even have, I mean, and I don't know if we've had to before. I imagine at some point it's affected our watershed in some light, but there had to have been some sort of plan. So what did that look like prior to, or even now? That new water plant's not going to be in place for some time. So if this year, God forbid, something happened, what's our plan?
There are a few answers to that. One, that's one of the reasons that Northwest Water Treatment Facility was built, and built to the capacity that it was built at, because on a normal day, Northwest Water Treatment Facility can meet the indoor demand of our city. So we would be able to continue to meet our indoor demand. And because of the technology that Northwest uses, it could process those suspended solids that come with wildfire. Semper runs into a problem, as would any traditional plant of its kind, in that the additional solids that come with wildfire end up clogging filters, and they have much shorter run times. That's the operational problem. So we would rely on the approximately 32 million gallons of water we have in storage, and our ability at Semper to rapidly backwash those filters and operate Northwest at its capacity. That's the backup plan. It's not the best plan for our future. It is a
Well,
risk.
And I understand that. So I mean, what I'm trying to understand and get a picture of is prior to this leadership and prior to these decisions, there obviously was that plan in place. And I think you kind of just spelled it out, which was what I understood is the plan before was to utilize Northwest and do maintenance on the other one and vice versa and be able to utilize those two. Do you have any sense before your time and before you redid the master plan, how long were they thinking that that would last? I mean, the city I know is really good about saying, here's our assets and how long we think that we could keep it. I mean, what was the plan to that point? Like, did they have like a trigger that said in 2014 we should check it, or do we know that?
I'd have to, Max, I'm going to jump in here. I really don't want to speculate on what happened with previous staffs and administration on these matters. And furthermore, I'd like to suggest we're into some very good questions, and obviously at least two of you have a lot of questions about 2025. That decision was made a long time ago, but nevertheless, you're going to be the ones voting on this increase, and you're tying it, your view of whatever increase may be necessary for the construction of our utility. You're tying this information to that. So I'd suggest to our staff that we set up a study session specific to 2025 if the full council, or at least a majority of the council, wants to do that. Because that is in and of itself a couple of hour discussion. And so we can continue, if you'd like, to try to answer these here tonight, or probably do a better job for you in putting it into a separate study session, if that's the council's desire for that to happen before you make decision on the 2022 rate.
I'll defer that to the mayor to ask that question when the time comes. I'd like to finish my questions though, or make a point and then we can move on. I mean, to me, so far, there's been some things that you guys have recommended that I think are good things, such as, per gallon billing, the potential of a fixed billing cycle. Those are all things that we've asked about, and I think that we've all agreed are going to be good things. I, however, don't think they substantially change the burden of the cost of water to our residents. So, you haven't given us what those are going to be. But so far, I haven't heard much change in the decision or discussion besides let's validate why we've been doing what we've been doing. I mean, that's what I'm taking away from tonight. I certainly am open to hearing more about 2025 because I am very curious about prior. And I'm not asking you to get in their mind. I'm asking to know what we know was on the books, was the plan. People come and go in any organization, and a good organization has those plans laid out. So if that wasn't the case, that's unfortunate, and hopefully we do better moving forward. But with that, I don't have any further questions at this point.
All right, let me go back to this. We're almost at the 8 o'clock time. There was a couple of questions in there about resending a copy of a report to the council staff. I'd like you to go into the chat, see what that was, and make sure that gets out. Chris, Dean, go back to the pieces that we need to try to resolve tonight to give you some direction to go forward with, so that this doesn't bog down again. Two, I think that the council has been very open about supporting. And to Councilor DeMott's comments, one is to get onto a sustained billing cycle and to get to the actual use, not on the 1,000 basis. I think we've all said that was supported, keeping in mind that we have to get the new meter system and all of the software, and the target for that was in the June timeframe of this year, unless something happens. And Max, I think that's the time frame that you guys have said you thought you'd have the system up and running and have it tested that we could go through, keeping in mind that not everybody in the city is going to be on that new meter system. So we will still have some computations that we'll have to do to get to the others to get there. And that requires, I believe you said, the continued manual reading of the meters. I think those two on the 30-day billing cycle, getting down to the actual, I don't know that there's anybody on the council that disagreed with that recommendation. If there is, somebody give me a sign that you're not. Otherwise, I'm going to determine that we've said we all support getting onto that sequence as soon as the system is ready and can handle that, which is target is in the June timeframe. And if that changes, staff, you let us know. So Christine, I need to go back to find the slide that you were looking for so I can make sure we try to give you guidance on some of the stuff.
So I will go back to the star slide, which summarizes everything,
Okay.
and we can walk
Try
through
to
those.
from there.
Here we go.
Okay, so I think we all said yes on the 30-day billing cycle, yes on the gallon-based system. Continue to look at the affordability programs, which I think Councilman Scully and a couple of others asked questions about it. Looking at ways to finance project strategies. I don't think there's any of us that disagree with trying to find the best ways to finance something that are the least impactful. I don't have a feeling one way or the other where the rest of the council is on what I was just saying. Hey, can you look at this? And it is there a potential to have a reduction in our reserve account and use that money to help pay for our infrastructure costs, which then it could allow us to not have to look at as extreme a rate increase, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't look at, can we settle on something that is steady for a number of years? So let me stop with that one. And that also, I think, would look at the project financing strategies, the utility reserve, and predictable rate increases, all coming back to us from you doing a study on that area. Council, I need at least 3 or 4 others if that is something that you're interested in. And if it's not, then we can drop it. Councilor Scully.
Yes, I'm in favor.
All right, Councilor Voles. I lost you somewhere. Where'd you go?
Yeah, sorry about that.
Oh.
Yes, I would support that as well. Thank you.
All right, Councilor Smith.
Mr. Mayor, you asked me, and are we looking at all of what's starred here as far as what we're recommending?
All we're doing right now is asking them to come, we're giving them the policy decision on, do we want to deal with these or not? And those that we don't, we'll put away.
I'm going to make a suggestion to Christine. Christine, let's go the individual slides that have that narrative detail, because it's hard to remember what those exactly said. I think that may help.
Understood.
So is this where you want to start? What I had recommended is to have the staff look at, if we have a reserve, which we do, and we know we've got that reserve for our water infrastructure, can we reduce the amount that we keep in that reserve to a smaller amount? Don't know what that is or what the impact is. Also, if we can reduce that and move some of that reserve to our continuing CIP projects, that would allow us to potentially keep any rate increases lower, because we've lowered that other pieces. And also allows us to do what this one says, avoid spikes in rates. So we could potentially lay out 4 to 5 years in advance, saying, okay, this rate is going to be steady for X number of years. That allows us to reduce the reserve, get more infrastructure CIP project work done because we're not keeping as much in reserve, but then the consistency of rate would be allowed to all of our ratepayers. What that is or what it could be, I don't know. Staff needs to look at that and come back with a recommendation. There is no decision that we're going to do it, but if we don't know how that impact could help us or harm us, there's nothing to make a decision on. So all I'm asking is have them put this together and bring it back to us as part of what we will be discussing on future rate discussions.
Okay, if we're looking at having staff look at further recommendations as far as the rates. I am in favor of reducing the rates. Any way that we can look at reducing that within these guidelines, I am 100% for. The one that starred here that caused me to have concern is move rate burden onto business. I think everyone needs to pay their own fair share, whether that's residential and or business. So that one is a little sticky for me. But if we're looking at just recommendations, my recommendation is to reduce our rates for our ratepayers and to provide it in a fair share manner. So yes, staff continue to look at this further.
All right, Councilor DeMott.
I'm in favor of looking at it, and kind of in the line of what Councilor Smith just said, I'd be curious with, depending on how low you could take that reserve, could we go back and reduce the rates that we already have in place? So I'm open to hearing options, and any option that reduces future rates or past rates, you can count on me being on board with.
Yeah, and I think one of the things is we're trying to make sure that if we have to have a rate increase, which likely will, not to be getting into these high single and double digits because we don't handle it well in 1 year. If I can give you, say, using Councilor Smith as an example, your payment is going to be X dollars for the next 5 years. If we approve this reduction of our reserve and we put it into more capital construction. If we don't do that, then the potential is that your rate's going to go up and down over the next 5 years. And we're trying to make people understand this is an opportunity for planning purposes and for budgeting purposes, you're going to see this kind of a rate consistent for the next 5 years.
Understood. And I think this is exactly the kind of out of box thinking that we need if we're going to make an impact that's going to help the residents. So definitely in favor of hearing more about it.
All right, Councilor Seymour.
Yeah, I'm very much in favor of a reserve change. I believe that our projected year-end rate stabilization reserve was going to be close to 34 million. And we've never tapped even up to 10% of that in any 1 year. So I think that's a great place to start.
All right, Mayor Pro Tem.
I also agree. I think, and I just want to be really clear to anyone listening, this was a staff recommendation, was to look at, allow staff to reevaluate the reserve. And I think, of course, we want to do it. I don't think we should overpromise what that means, or I think it remains to be seen if that would give us the type of capacity to have guaranteed rates. So I don't want people to think that the fact that we're looking at this promises that, but I'm hopeful that it allows us to bring down what those rate increases are, allows some stabilization. But I just think we should have some expectation management, because I doubt very highly there is enough there to be a panacea.
We don't know at this point, and your point's very clear. But until somebody can look at it, we don't know what this thing may be a bust. It may not work at all. But today, with what we have in front of us, we don't know that. All right, what was the next one you have, Christine?
Continuation of those 6 integrated policies.
All right, so any objection to the continuing with what we've already approved as far as the integration policies? Mr. DeMott?
I mean, I've been opposed to our path, so I'd have to say, to stay consistent, I don't like the path we're on, and we need to make a change, in my opinion. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I would just ask Councilor DeMont which one specifically of these 6 different ones he does not want to keep, because these are just policy principles. I just would like to understand which ones he'd like us to change.
I think that I've been pretty clear over the years that I feel like our rates are too high. This got us to those rates. We are in a tiered system that if you end up in that top tier, it is unaffordable. And I think that it's these policies that got us into that. So whatever mix gets us to where we're at, I mean, and we're told this is the magic sauce. So it's hard for me to pick one by one. All I know is we're in an unaffordable space, in my opinion. And it's not just the high income earners that our policies have hurt. It's people who grow their own food. It's people in big lots in old neighborhoods. So we need to change. And so I think You know, I don't want to pick them apart. We don't have time tonight. I just think we need a change.
Right.
Okay,
Mr.
we
Seymour.
spent 10 hours though going over this together publicly, understanding how we got to each one of these in efforts to be able to hear exactly which ones we would be willing to move. Understand how we made, like staff made each of these recommendations as policy principles. So I would love to hear specifically after understanding the data, which ones you feel comfortable changing and your reasoning behind it. I just want to understand logically how we can provide, which I know you agree with, we want to provide high quality, safe, reliable, compliant drinking water to our residents. Which of these do you think is creating a problem that is not necessary to provide that?
If I'm to be frank, I think that the cadence of growth in the city is a problem. I think that the cadence in which we're replacing things is a problem. I don't know how that exactly fits into these policies, but it's not about not keeping safe drinking water. I don't think anybody's ever disagreed about we should have safe drinking water, but we should also have affordable drinking water. Safe drinking water does me no good if I can't afford it. So, you know, I think I've been pretty clear. I'm not going to sit and go point by point with you, Mayor Pro Tem. I'm sorry.
All right, let me go to the others that had their hands up. I saw Councilor Seymour.
Thank you, Mayor. And I think too that taking each one of these, this package right here is really of no value tonight to say, okay, let's not do this or let's not do this. This has been an overall package of how we get places, especially if you want to take one out of here that I have concern out over time. And I can't make a detailed judgment of this until we get an actual dollar amount given to us in March and says, okay, here's what we need to be. Here's what our projection is going to be. If we go here, then we have to go here later. If we go up, then we have to go down later. As we started out last year when we were looking at this and we were given projections. But we have to be careful. I think if we accept all of this, do we then come back with an argument? You accepted the 6 tenets of the pillars of this foundation. No, the foundation is we cannot continue on the rate path that we have. If we're going to enhance fixed water revenues, does that give us carte blanche? No. Mayor Pro Tem, we have yet to see the dollar amount, and nor should we yet. We have been doing foundational work over these last 5 meetings. Those foundationals will then bring us to the dollar amounts per gallon or 1,000 gallons. We'll make a value judgment at that point. But before that, to would be wrong. Tonight, we're making decisions on big issues to say, all right, let's look at our reserves. Let's look at this.
I would counter this is one of those foundationals.
Could I add just a really quick point? This is your discussion, so I don't want to be in this long, except to say the recommendations we've made to you tonight will allow us, Councilor Seymour and others, to establish the rate recommendation. And many of them actually give us the latitude to keep that rate as low as it possibly can be. If you take, for instance, the ability to use more of our reserves and to reduce that reserve ratio, that allows us to stretch it out and reduce the rate. If you say to us as a group that no, you don't want to change that, that would likely make the rate have to be higher. It's all based on us assuming that we're only going to build for the rate for the water customer and for the city, the things that have to be built in the time period that they have to be done. That's the foundation of it. And we can continue to talk about that. The discussion of the 2025 treatment plant may help bolster that for some of you. But I want to just state really affirmatively and firmly that what we're going to recommend to you is what has to be built in the time that it has to be built. And these policies in front of you tonight help us determine how we can get that done in a manner that keeps the rate as low as possible.
All right, did anybody have another comment that I missed? Councilor Bowles, I think I missed you. You okay? All right, right now, I'm not seeing a majority that says that they can't move forward with the policies that were proposed here, understanding that nothing is set. Rates and stuff still have to be discussed. The 2025 plan still have to be discussed, but they've got to have something to move forward to work on, or they can't bring anything back to us. What's your next one, Christine?
This is the last one, Mayor. Oops, sorry. Reviewing the CIP and operating budgets.
Okay. I think this is something that we've all agreed on. We want the lowest sustainable rates that pays for our system. But the budget has to cover the three pieces in budget number 2. And that our citizens have said just what it shows on the slide. The safe, healthy drinking water is a priority for us, and the availability to have water. I don't know that there's any argument that this is a piece of what we're looking at. And this is something I think we're all striving to make sure we do. Now, is there any objection to this one? All right, I'm seeing none, so we'll go ahead with that one. Is that the last one you needed, Christine, tonight?
Yes.
All right. Council, it's approximately 8:16. If there was a question that you wanted to ask that you did not get an opportunity, please submit that to the staff. We'll try to get that back to you as soon as possible, understanding we still have many decisions forthcoming on 2025 plan, financing, and some of the questions that were asked tonight to have staff come back to us and present their findings and recommendations. With that being said, it's been 5 sessions that we've had to talk about water and water rates. We've had a number of citizens who have sat in on these very patiently for a long period of time. And unfortunately, we're not done. The decisions still have to be made. We've had a lot of policy discussion. We've had a lot of discussion and training about where things come from, where they go, and how they're done. All of that will have to be used to help us make and formulate our final decisions, which will be coming over the next 6 to 7 months. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we thank you for your time tonight. We appreciate your patience. And again, if you have questions, get those to staff. Rich, go ahead. Oh, you were waving by. All right. Good night, everyone.
For the
Have a
record, Mr. Mayor, before we go, for the record, the report that we received a few months ago that went over exactly the water resource changes based off of comp plan changes since 2014, that will be resent to every member of council since there was an assertion we never received it.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Good.
Yes,
That would
thank
have been
you.
a good answer to get when I brought it up earlier tonight, but thanks for putting me in my place. Always appreciate it.
All right.
It's always
night,
good to be
everyone.
accurate.
Thank you, Mayor and Council and Mayor Pro Tem for your time this evening.
Good night, everybody.